Welcome. I'm Charlene Garrett, and this is the Accidental Mentor Podcast, where we talk about mentoring that is intentional, but oftentimes it's accidental. This is episode 5 of my conversation with Julie. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you know when episode 6 comes out. In the last episode, you heard us talk about encounter, and we talked about something called ungodly beliefs or self-limiting beliefs, and really how those learning about that impacted Julie's life and really transitioned and changed where she was headed. I would really be interested to hear what you think about that. But in this episode, we talk more about our mentoring relationship and putting people on pedestals and how they can fall off of pedestals, as well as anxiety and fear and how we learn how to handle anxiety from our families and our families of origin, and really how that transitioned and changed for Julie and my own ignorance about anxiety, actually. And then we end up talking a little bit about chairs on tables. You'll have to listen all the way through and let me know what you think. So here's today's episode of The Accidental Mentor.
More of that. And that's really all that the relationship is. I mean, it's not that complicated. It's just friendship, a little bit of intentionality.
You mentioned this significant moment that changed when you moved from Houston to Dallas. You said that was August 2013, is that right?
Yep. August 19th, 2013.
August 19, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we met, let's say August of 2003, that was about 10 years.
Yeah.
And 10 years from now. So that's like literally the halfway point of where we are today. Isn't that cool?
That's very cool.
So those first 10 years, I think you mentioned when we were talking, you mentioned, some things were miraculous, like overnight, a few things happened, and then there was process. One of the things that I think is super key is that, that statement that God said to me was, it's not your job to correct Julie, but it's your job to remind her of who she was. I've kept that as the key for any of my relationships, any mentoring or encouraging or any kind of relationship, that really it's not my job to tell somebody whether they're right or wrong. It's about life and death, right? And so it's my job to remind people of who they are. And for 10 years, like I had no idea it was going to take 10 years, but I always saw the future. Like you said, yeah. You couldn't have imagined, right, that future necessarily. I always saw you in that future.
And that's so weird to me.
Isn't
Not
that
now, but back then it was so weird.
Right?
Yeah.
Like
so weird.
And I think, for the good piece of that, one of the things that was helpful for me to do that was because we weren't necessarily, we weren't interacting daily, like every moment. I didn't see all of your good or all of your bad choices all the time, because we didn't live together. Like I have, and we're going to talk maybe a little bit about the pay it forward, but I have had the opportunity to be in a daily relationship with young women who considered me like a mom, and it was a totally different relationship, but it was much harder because daily we were seeing each other's, and vice versa. Like you said, I was up on a pedestal for quite a while.
You probably would have fallen from that a little
I would have fallen pretty quickly if you had seen me day to day and everything, because I had no business being on a pedestal, but maybe that was helpful for a season, right?
It was a step stool.
The thing I want to talk about, I think, is I want to go back to that first 10 years. So we can split this into the two 10-year chunks. We'll think about the first 10 years and the second 10 years. In that first 10 years, we've already mentioned a few things that we did together, that I helped you with car stuff, or we talked about a budget here and there. We ate together often. We sometimes went to church together. And I was thinking about all the different living situations When I lived in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I probably moved every 6 months for several years. I mean, I was in that 20-something age range where, if I would had roommates. And anytime you have roommates, it doesn't last that long usually. Someone has to leave or move, and then you have to get a new situation, new lease, whatever. So I was moving a lot. You had a few different living situations um, during that first 10 years as well.
Yes.
Yes.
I did.
One of them reminds me, I don't remember if this was the triplex you keep mentioning. So you said the triplex. Was the triplex the one that you got through Ken?
Yes, that's what I got through Ken.
So one of the things that is a gift of mine, I've been told, is networking and connecting people to resources and things. And so that was another situation where I guess, do you remember how you came about, why I even connected you to Ken? I don't actually remember the circumstances.
So I know my lease was coming up and it was really more than I could afford, even though I'd been making it. So you connected me with Ken because he had some rental properties. Because that was another thing. I didn't have great rental history. So getting in somewhere was really complicated. And so you connected me with Ken and he showed me a couple of properties. And to the best of my recollection, it was basically like your butt would have been on the line to some extent you didn't officially co-sign for me on the lease, but Ken let me borrow your trustworthiness in order to get into the door. And I moved into a triplex he was managing in Fort Worth. And I think I ended up working for him a little bit. I cleaned a couple of the rental properties. So it kind of connected to a place to live and some extra income.
A little extra cash.
Yeah. And I did good there. I lived there throughout my entire lease. I paid the rent. It was great. It was a good little season there.
It was a good season, which is
Mostly.
helpful, right? Yeah. It's always a mixed bag, right? When we're growing and learning, but I mean, think about that. Like, we don't know we can do something until we do it. Right. So I don't actually know, as an example, that I can pay my rent every month or on time or whatever until I do it every month for a year or for a whole lease. And then it's like, oh, wait, I can do this, especially if our experience has been something different. I mean, I remember I worked at UPS for about 5 years, and I remember about 3 years in, I was amazed that I got up and went to work every day and worked 8 to 5, and I drove an hour there and an hour home because I hated the 9 to 5 kind of job. And I thought, oh, I can do this. That's just an example. So you realize that was good. It's funny that you say that my butt was on the line because I don't think Ken ever said that to me. But I do remember feeling a little bit like I was brokering some of my trust. At the time, he was my landlord. I lived with his family, so I was renting a room from them. And yeah, that was quite an experience, a good time. But I think that's another thing that it's a delicate balance. I remember right around that time, somewhere in there, I recommended someone for a job at UPS, and they ended up walking off the job. They stayed for a while, but they walked off the job. Ouch. And I felt terrible about that. Now, I wasn't fully responsible. UPS didn't hold me accountable, but I was very careful who I gave references to or recommendations to going forward for that, because I was like, I worked in human resources too. So it was like, that was
oopsie.
It's like, whoops.
So sorry.
Yeah. And what's sad about the situation, just as a side note, is the reason she walked off was because of harassment. And she just didn't want to deal with it. So instead of reporting it, which is hard to do, she was getting some treatment, sexual harassment, and just decided she didn't want to put up with it anymore. So that was a sad thing. I talked about that later. And I did that early on when I was 18. I walked off of a temp job because of sexual harassment, and I didn't call my temp agency. Kelly Services will never hire me again.
Oh, no. Well, thankfully you've gotten a couple other jobs since then.
Yeah. I've learned a
Just a
little
few.
bit. Just a few. Just have had a few.
Few
But I
jobs.
get like we learn, right? So like no
Yeah.
judgment, even as I say that about her, because I did the exact same thing, and I learned. Oh wait, that was probably not the best thing to do. I could have actually said something. I was
Yeah.
afraid.
Fear is a
So
powerful motivator.
it is. It's just not very gracious or consistent.
No, it's not.
It doesn't pay off. So in that first 10 years, we said, I only lived in the Dallas Fort Worth area. I ended up moving to Africa in 2007. So 3, 4, 5, 6, and then early 2007, I left. I go to Africa. What did you think when I moved off to Africa? Do you remember that?
I mean, it's the same as I was that first 10 years. So I just thought you were doing incredible things, gifted by the Lord. And I'll probably never do those kind of things.
And here
Like
I
I just
am.
I attributed it to who you were, right? Completely just Charlene does good, so she gets look at her off helping people in Africa. I'm just here doing some drugs. Like it's we were so we definitely reaped what we sowed. So that's a valid principle. But I don't think I had a thought anything as far as our relationship that I recall where it was like, oh, she's gonna be in Africa and now we're not connected anymore. Because
Yeah.
even when you were in Africa, you came through and we still connected. I don't, did we talk while you were in Africa? I don't know.
We
Did you have,
did.
I
We
don't
did
know what the phone
some.
situation was.
I had Skype back in
That's
the
right.
days,
Yeah.
pre-Zoom, Skype, and we had pretty good internet actually. I joke now sometimes my internet at my house is worse than it was when I lived in Africa a decade ago. But it was we did talk a few times. Um, not a ton. I am a pursuer and you're not, right? To
No.
be fair. So when we would talk, I
Um,
was probably reaching out to you.
yeah. I've still got some room for opportunity in
Some
that
growth, some
department.
growth
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, a little bit.
Well,
It's a
so
process, someone told me
it's
once.
it's a process. Oh, the process.
I was so annoyed by you and your process.
Talk about the process. I used to talk about that a lot.
You would, because every time I would come to something and I'd have some kind of revelation and I'd have some freedom, I'd be like, this is awesome. And then inevitably something would go wrong and I would fall back into old habits and I'd be like, okay, this is ridiculous. And then you would encourage me. And I'm like, when does it get better? Like, when does the process, so we lovingly put it, when is it over? When do I get there? And I was so frustrated. And you looked at me and you go, we won't say process. We'll just call it an onion. There's multiple layers to the onion. I was so mad. I was like, don't you dare call this an onion. I want to be better. I want to be
So
well.
I want to go on record as saying I'm almost positive that was before Shrek.
Well, oh, that's right. I think it was. I think
I
I will
think
give you credit
I
for
had
that.
the onion before Shrek
Before
talked
Shrek
about
did. We'll have to
ogres
check
are
the
like
dates.
onions. I know.
I did think of you when I saw that.
Because
But
I
your
remember seeing it
process.
later. Yes, your process. You're like, I don't like that onion. I think
I
you
don't
even asked me to call it something different than it now. You're like, can we have like a layered donut or something?
Yeah,
No.
something different than this. Yeah, it's because we were always talking about it. And every time you were encouraging me, and I know that you were, and I catch myself now on the other end of it, going, I know how you feel. It's a process. And I say it and I go, oh man, I know how that stings. But it is because that's like you were talking earlier about like the miraculous and the process. Before I had the miraculous, there was a big stretch of process
Mm,
before and after of
hmm
me, needing to unlearn things, build new habits, start reaping better or sowing better so I could reap better. And it took, like when you were talking about how you only know something once you know it. I had a blank slate. My life had never, I mean, every now and again it would poke its little head up a little bit, but mostly I had learned to live in complete fear
hmm
and, retreat when anything got complicated and have very black and white, all or nothing relationships with people.
hmm
And so back then, when you just kept saying this was a process, it was really hard for me to see. Now from the other side, I can see, okay, there's value in that. And I definitely would have taken some quicker steps if I could have seen this.
Right. Oh, I know.
Now,
Isn't that
yeah,
funny?
I would have ran here a little faster.
When you're talking about that, it's reminding me of at some point, early on when I was still living in the Dallas Fort Worth area, I remember saying to you, "Oh man, I am just really overwhelmed." Or there was a lot going on in my life. I don't remember what the circumstances were, but I remember making this statement, "Oh, I'm just a little anxious." And I remember you saying to me, "What? You get anxious?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, everybody gets anxious. Like that's a thing. It's just what you do with it." And that was my aha recognize. I said it like I knew what I was talking about, but I didn't. It was an
I
awareness
thought
at
you knew
that
what you were
moment.
talking about.
It was a new awareness where it was like, oh, right. We actually learn through growing up in different circumstances how to handle or process. Our brain learns, and now I know way more about it than I did then from a neurobiological standpoint, but we learn how to handle anxiety
Hmm.
and the ups and downs of life because stress isn't unusual. It's consistent. And you had learned a particular way of handling anxiety up to that point. If I remember, right? Like just
Yeah.
this is, you know.
Like my anxiety, I feel, and before I say this, I'll say, like, my mom is amazing and she is one of my bestest friends. But when we were younger, she was a single mom who had learned patterning from her mom, who,
Right.
and it was just kind of passed down. And so we lived in a very anxious environment. I remember there were times when we'd go to the store or something, and my mom would have a panic attack and we'd just have to leave. And so I would watch that and then I would say, I didn't realize that I was modeling it, that I was doing the same type of things, but it was a safety mechanism. If you get scared and upset, if you're so anxious that you can just shut down, which it wasn't like, I'm choosing to do this, but
You just did it.
my wiring was programmed to shut down,
Mm-hmm.
to not call people, to not engage in life, and just basically, um, um, so your fear response, fight or flight, I was oftentimes freeze.
Mm-hmm.
I just would do
Mm-hmm.
nothing. And that was kind of like a reason. And then when I would get better in the moment, I would try to do it differently, but I never actually put anything new in my process. I just started something new with the same foundation. And so it wasn't until I actually went back to start rebuilding the foundation
Mm-hmm.
that I was actually able to, because when people ask me, like, how do you're not anxious, or, but to your point, I do get anxious at times. I feel anxiety.
Right.
It's just not something that controls me. And so, I have to be honest with them. If you, for me, knowing the Lord and knowing Jesus, that's what gives me freedom. There, I don't know how to tell somebody. I mean, you can walk out a principle, like you can forgive somebody and see some fruit from that because it's a real thing. But if you're not actually trusting that your life is designed with intent and that you were here for a very specific reason, it's really hard. The world is overwhelming, and I had to rewire my brain to realize the truth when I would see it versus thinking the truth was the lie, or the
Mm-hmm.
lie was the truth.
Yeah. It's funny. Um, I'm learning a lot right now about attachment and how important
Hmm.
that first year even of life is that we don't even realize, and how attuned we are as infants to our primary caregiver and their ability or capacity. And like you, my parents were amazing, and so it's not or but and
Mm.
it was tricky. My dad was my primary caregiver. He was 43 when I was born, had been a bachelor up till he was 41 years old. So I can only imagine, an infant when I cried or whatever. There were times when I'm certain he was overwhelmed. I get overwhelmed sometimes by babies, and so that way that your brain gets set up and what to do when you're overwhelmed, and then you just start doing things, and then there's more patterning, more experiences as we grow up and all that kind of stuff. Like I just think about my own, I didn't shut down, but I went into overdrive, so I became a fixer. So a lot of the ways that I would early on handle my own anxiety, which I'm just now getting in touch with at 48 years old, is to amp things up.
Mm.
So talk faster,
Yeah.
take on more, um, drown out, disconnect in certain ways, and reconnect. Like I go find the solution with people or other people,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of disconnecting, and or connecting to God. And so even the attachment that that you're talking about. What's great about mentoring, about relationships, the only way we learn or relearn those things is through other relationships. It's through a relationship with God, it's through a relationship with people that become healthy, that help us. Some of my earliest, two of my best friends, I really attribute a ton of my healthy attachment, the part that is healthy, to their friendship, to our early years of them hanging in there when things are a bit crazy. Prior to meeting you, my 18, 19, 20-year-old self, um, I, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to even bring the 5B book or go and seek you out if it hadn't have been for those experiences for them to help me there. When I was 19, I tried to kill myself. And it was because I was overwhelmed and for a moment I lost hope and um and thought I was alone. I thought I was uniquely flawed. That was one of my biggest ungodly beliefs, that I'm uniquely flawed. Not just flawed, but there's nobody else like me. I'm uniquely flawed. And I've learned there's not too much that's unique. I mean, we're all
I would
flawed
say
pretty much
uniquely.
the same.
Yeah. I like that you said that because I think that, I mean, that was probably true for me too. And I think it's true for a lot of people now that you put it that way. I really like that because it is the fact that you're broken and nobody else is. Everybody else, or even if a little bit, they're regular people functioning at a regular capacity. And there's something just intrinsically wrong with you as an individual, or back then for me, with myself. Um, and it's really kind of arrogant of us
Yeah.
when you think about it, to think, God in his perfect wisdom thought that he should create us in some uniquely broken fashion.
Well, it's the thing that Satan is attacking, right? Is
Yeah.
identity from the
Hmm.
very moment that we're born. He's attacking our identity, and he's a narcissist. So why wouldn't he try to make us narcissists and like perfectly, like uniquely think that, our shame, our suck is the worst? And a piece of that, which is interesting, where like I'm wondering how I got off the pedestal, because when we pedestalize people, it is that difference, and
Hmm.
so um, which I've done too. I've had plenty of people. It took me a while, like, to realize, oh, right, just recognizing that everybody's got issues.
Yep.
Only Jesus, he's the only perfect one, and
Right.
yeah, so
Yeah, sorry, I don't think you're perfect quite anymore, but you're still pretty amazing.
it's okay. I don't have to be perfect.
I was just thinking about when you said the step stool again, it gave me a
Uh-huh.
vision. Do you remember that story you told me about the chair?
Yes.
The chair story. I swear that was completely mind blowing to me. Do you want to share your chair story, or do you want me to say what I remember?
Say what you remember, and then I'll
Okay.
tell you where I got it from, because it wasn't mine. Most of
It
what
wasn't
I've
yours.
ever told you, I've repackaged. So I just
Oh
want to like
man, I've
own
given
that.
you so much credit beyond your scaling Mount Everest. Um, okay. So I remember like when it was time when in the process in the first 10 years when I was trying to get, better and learn new patterning. But I would always choose people that were very much gonna fulfill my old self-fulfilling prophecy. So I would connect with people and then be very shocked when it turned out to be traumatic or upsetting and things like that, or they weren't trustworthy or whatever the case may be, because I didn't settle just one or two bad relationships. Um, and so, but I remember you telling me a story and you were like, Julie, you've gotten some healing, and it's like you're basically, was it on sitting up on a chair on a table? I can't remember if it was a chair on a table or a chair on top of another chair. Anyway, this chair is up high, possibly on a pedestal. And you're sitting in your chair, and then you see someone down there below you and you're trying to help them, but really you're not stable yet. You're just up here in your chair on a table. And so if they're more set in their way than you are in your newfound way, they're going to pull you down a lot faster than you're going to pull them up. And I had to learn that because it's really hard. You want to help people, especially when you learn something and you start finding freedom and you're like, oh, I'll tell them and they'll also be on board and we can do this together. And that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to love people from a distance.
So
did I get the chair right? Is that accurate?
Well,
it
is. So it's not a chair on a table. So
man,
let me own this.
Okay.
This particular picture I got from youth group. Okay, when I was in high school, at some point, some youth group that I was in, one of the youth pastors just stood on a chair, like a literal chair, just
standing on a chair,
just standing on a chair, and had somebody below, and he's like, okay, he's tried to pull him up onto the chair with him. And every single time, no matter how small the person was, the person up on the chair was pulled down. And that idea that gravity always pulls down, like no matter what. So that's not going to help. The way that the person actually gets up high enough is they get on a chair, right? They also have to come up themselves.
Right.
And what's interesting about that, there's another analogy that preachers will talk about where there's a donkey in a hole. Have you ever heard about this?
I do not know that I know the donkey in a hole. But
there's a donkey.
You got a lot of Shrek themes going.
Yeah, you can just imagine donkey. Good old donkey's down in the hole.
Okay.
And the donkey's in the hole, and whoever's trying to bury him. And so they take dirt and they throw dirt into the hole, and the donkey shakes it off and steps up. And he just keeps doing that until he becomes level ground, because he just shakes off all the dirt and steps up. And what I began to see is that as a mentor, my job, the world is throwing the dirt on you. You're already in the hole. Whatever has happened in your life, whatever's going on right then, you feel like you're in a hole.
Right.
And I can go sit with you in the hole, and I can pat you. Oh, I'm so sorry we're in the hole. And we could just sit there together. Or I can remind you who you are so you can shake off the dust that the world and Satan are throwing on you, and then encourage you to step up. But I can't pull you out of the hole. So I think oftentimes personality, we take one of two positions. We either get down and we're very empathetic and we sit with people in the hole, or we stand outside the hole and we look down and we think, maybe I can help you out, but you're just going to pull me in the hole. So I've watched that happen to people. It's happened to me. I've been pulled into holes because I've tried to yank people out. I've been in the hole and pulled people into the hole with me. I've been on all sides of this hole.
All around the hole.
That's basically that story. But really, it is both the prophetic encouragement, the word of God. It's the encouragement of reminding you who you are and whose you are that helps you shake off yourself. You shake off the dirt. I can't dust you off. And then say, just step up. And the reason why we don't like it is it takes time.
Yeah.
Think about all the dirt that you have to shake off to get up that hole, all the dirt, right? So we don't like it. We want it to be faster, just like everything else. Weight loss, how do you lose weight? You eat right and you move. But I'd rather take a pill, or whatever.
Yeah.
All the things. And we all get stuck, in that same thing. So it's interesting that you remember the chair.
I remember the overall concept.
Yeah. Well, and you applied it.
The chair I was sitting in, I was like, there's some way I'm unstable. Let's put that up on the table.
That's what it is. I'm not unstable enough.
I'm not unstable sitting down. I got to go stable. Do this.
When you were telling me your picture, I was imagining my desk chair with the rollers on it. On a table. That would really be unstable. That'd roll right off and fall right on your face and break your nose.
And I think in my mind, it's the little chairs that we used to have at Refuge. Those are the chairs. I probably those little chairs.
Yeah. Yeah. We had, have you ever seen those plastic chairs that are, they're all made out of one piece and you can stack them? They're pretty, people use them outside a lot. They're kind of flimsy. They're very popular in Africa because they're pretty cheap. And, I'm not tiny of a person. I've bent more than one of those. I've sat in them. When I was in Africa, they would stack two sometimes.
Not sitting on those chairs. Oh, that's good. They're stackable.
They would double up.
Yeah, reinforcement.
Double up, reinforcement. Yeah.
Oh, God.
So
I'll take 7 of your chairs, please.
Wow, Julie, you're really high. Like it's
Super
very,
high.
very
It's way up
reinforced.
here. Can't pull you up though.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Isn't Julie hilarious? I absolutely love listening to her. I love any way that she tells a story and she pulls out these one-liners. It's funny to me how my story from my youth pastor turned into, it was a guy on a chair, but it turned into a chair on a table and then someone sitting on that chair on the table. Just so funny. But in that episode, we talked about anxiety a lot and really Julie's experience with anxiety, how she handled anxiety, and then my ignorance, honestly, of social anxiety and anxiety, and how my ignorance really helped her. It's interesting with anxiety and emotions, we can hold two things in tension at one time. And a lot of times when we put a name to it, we can really understand it and we feel it differently. What is your experience with anxiety or with emotions? Do you consider yourself emotionally literate? We talk about things like EQ, but what does that really mean? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. And also, what stuck out to you in the episode? Tell me more about that. Let's keep the conversation going. While you're there, like, subscribe, review. Please tell people about this podcast so that we can keep the conversation and get more people involved in mentoring. All of my contact information is in the show notes, so please get a hold of me. In this next episode, we're going to talk more about process, unhealthy relationships. We go a little bit deeper into Julie's life and really where I was in all of that. It's a really good episode. You're not going to want to miss it. Remember, he who began a good work in you will carry it out to completion. I'm Charlene Garrett, and this is The Accidental Mentor.